Hello everyone, this video will show you how to install and configure sudo on a Debian Linux machine. Just a quick reminder, if during installation you set a password to the root user, well, a few steps later, when you will configure your first user on the machine, it will not install sudo and it will not put the first created user in the sudo group. So you will not be able to use the sudo command on your new installed system. In this case, you will need to log in as a root to execute a command with administrator rights. At least that is true when we install Debian in the minimal version without a graphical interface. I think with the last version of Debian, if we install with the GUI interface, sudo will be installed even if we specify a password for root. Well, if ever sudo does not work on your Debian machine and you want to use it, I will show you how to do this. So firstly, we need to connect to the root account. You can do it directly on the server itself, write root as username. And you can also do it with a command on a terminal screen connected with your user. You just have to use the su space dash command to log in as root. Of course, it will ask you to enter the root password. And if you enter the correct password, your terminal session will be logged with the root user. All commands you will enter will be executed with administrator rights. But if you normally use Ubuntu, for example, you probably notice Ubuntu has a different behavior. Normally in a Ubuntu machine, you cannot connect with root and you have to do sudo before a command if you want to execute it with administrator right. If you use Debian and you want to use sudo too, this video will show you how to configure it. If it is not already configured, depending on the option you choose during the installation. If you are wondering what are the advantages of using sudo, the first one is all command launches with the sudo command are logged in your system Linux logs file. It is very useful in an enterprise context when many people, many system administrators work on that server. It can be relevant to know who made the different commands with administrator rights. If everyone is using the root user, it is not easy to know who execute the different command. Another advantage with the sudo command is we can give access to only some commands for a user or a group. It will be possible to create a group of users for your database administrator, for example, and then you can configure access to only some commands. So only the command specified will be allowed to be used by your database administrator. This can be useful from a security point of view. Another advantage with sudo is your user do not have to know the root password. This too, in an enterprise case, can be relevant for a security reason. And finally, it can be safe to not execute all commands with the root privilege. What I mean by that is if you follow a procedure and you are logged as a root in your terminal session, all the commands you will enter will be executed with the administrator rights. Whereas if you normally execute this command with your user, normally you will only enter sudo on the front of the command. You need the administrator rights. So now to show you how to do that, I'm connected to a Debian Linux server machine, a new freshly installed system. In my case, sudo is not configured and installed on this machine. If I ever try to do sudo vi/etc/fs tab, for example, to modify the fstab file, it will tell me sudo command is not found. Of course, if I enter the command without sudo, it will open the file with the VI editor, but I will not have the administrator rights. So I won't be able to save that system file after editing it. Here is the message telling me that I'm in the read-only mode. So how can I install and configure sudo? The first step is to be logged in as root to have the administrator right. So as I showed you previously, if you are currently in a terminal screen logged with your user, you only need to enter su space dash command to become root. You have to enter the root password. I also want to specify that. I will show you how to do that with the command line, because this instruction will work no matter which graphical interface you use on your Debian system. So once connected with root, we have to install the sudo package. So this can be done with the command apt install sudo. I want to specify the following procedure is for Debian system. So for any other Linux distribution, this instruction will depend on the Linux distribution. That following one is for Debian Linux system, Debian 12 to be more exact. So now sudo is installed, but for the moment I still can use sudo because I have to add my user in the sudo group. Just to show you what it would be show if I don't add my user in the sudo group, I will try it and it should tell me that my current user is not a sudoer. So if you ask yourself how to put your user in the sudo group, it's very easy to show you that. I will log back to root, and after in Debian Linux, there are several commands available to do that. The first one I will show you is the adduser command, followed by the username we want to add in the sudo group. In my case, it is user1, and I will enter the name of the existing group where I want to add this user. It is the sudo group. So in Debian, when I execute the add user command with an existing username and an existing group, it will add the username on the group specified on the command. It can be a different behavior if you use that in another Linux distribution. So just to be sure that what I said is true, I will verify if my user1, is now in the sudo group. I will execute the following command, cat/etc/group. It is the file containing all the group in my Linux system. And here we see my sudo group, and at the end of the line, we see all its members. In my case, only user1 is member of this group. So now do that command for all the user you want to add in the sudo group, and then this user will be able to execute any command with the administrator rights. But of course, they will have to add sudo in the front of the commands. As I said earlier, it is possible to specify permission and restriction. For example, if you want for some user to authorize only some commands, but this is something I will show you in a future video. But for this current video, I just wanted to show you how to add a user in the sudo group. And of course, how to install sudo if it is not installed and configured in your Debian system. So I showed you a command to add username in a group, but it exists other command to do the same thing. You can use the usermod command, for example. That command is to modify a user. So with this option, it will add a group to this user. So in this example, it will add sudo group to my user1 user. Another important thing I want to specify If you are using a Red Hat Linux machine and you want to add a user to use sudo, you will notice that there are no sudo group in your Red Hat Linux machine and other derivative distribution. It is the same things for a Fedora Linux too. On this distribution, the group is not named sudo but well. So if I was in the Red Hat Linux machine and I wanted Bob to be able to execute a command with the sudo privilege, this is the command I should enter. But I won't run it because in my Debian Linux system, I don't have a user group named well. So it is time to test it. I will log out from the root user, but if I immediately try to use the sudo command, it will not work. The new group configured to my user will only be applied on the next login. So I'm going to log out and I'm going to reconnect to my Debian server. In my case, I was connected by SSH to my Debian system. If in your case you are directly connected to your Debian machine, whether it's a server or a workstation with a graphical interface, you just have to log out and log in. To test it and confirm that it works, I'm going to enter sudo vi. Vi is the text editor, and I'm going to specify the file I want to open with the vi editor. That file requires administrator rights to be able to be safe, and it should work because my user is now in the sudo group. I have to enter my username password to confirm my identity, and just for the test, I will add a comment line on this file. Yes, I have to admit I currently do my test with a critical file in the Linux system. I do not recommend editing that file if you don't have to do that, and especially if you don't know what fstab file is for. But it is the first file came to my mind to show you an example. So in this example, I add a line as a test, a comment line. It is important to specify it is a comment line. All character after a hash mark in a line is a comment. And I'm going to save and exit the file text editor. And it worked. It allowed me to save my change on the system file. So it confirmed that I can use sudo in front of my commands to execute them with the administrator rights. Many operations on your Linux distribution need administrator rights. For example, to install new updates, to manage your hard drive, your LVM partition, or like in my example, to edit and save a system config file. So now if I display the content of my fstab file again, we see the line I add in my previous command. So that confirms me it is a mission accomplished, it worked, and I can use the sudo command with my user. So that's all for this video. I hope it was useful for you. And now the only thing I have to do is to wish you a good day. Bye bye.